Welcome, everyone. We had almost 100 people registered for this. We got people from the US, Canada, India, the UK, Denmark, Germany, Brazil, Mexico, Bangladesh, Qatar. And someone registered from a country called 2332. That's what they put into the form. So I don't know where that is, but it sounds great. Would love to visit that one day. I see a lot of familiar faces, so that's great. So we're Mike and I are going to be talking about from tickets to trust, really all about earning credibility through outcomes. And we talk a lot about outcomes, and that's a popular topic nowadays with product management, in product management circles. We're going to try and help you guys deconstruct and talk about what does that actually mean? So it's pretty simple the way these things run. If you haven't been on one of these before, we're going to do a quick welcome and intros, then we're going to get into the meat of our discussion. We'll have Q&A. We have a lot to get through. I think Mike and I have overly packed the agenda, but that's great. We'll have plenty of content for you guys. We will pause for questions. Feel free to light up the chat, introduce yourself, where you're calling in from. Feel free to exchange LinkedIn contacts if you'd like. It's always good to build network. Raise your virtual hand if you have a question or enter the question into the chat. We will leave time for sure at the end for questions, but go ahead and just flood it. Recording will be sent out. And if you're a paid subscriber or inner circle member of my newsletter, you'll get some more goodies that'll come out of today's episode. So for those of you who don't know me, I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great. But for those of you who've never met me, don't know me, just real quick, I've been in product management in some form or the other for like almost 30 years as an entrepreneur, as a product executive. I've worked across multiple different industries, founded a few companies, and now I have a pretty fast-growing global newsletter called Street Smart Product Manager, and now I have this live series. And also, fun fact, I perform and teach improv. So there you go. Let me introduce our guest of honor, my co-host for today, who's going to help me through our exciting topic, Michael Smart. So Michael has got an incredible career and track record and background. First and foremost, he's founder and managing principal at Egress Solutions, where he helps product management teams and executives and product companies. He's held executive roles in NASDAQ traded companies. He's been doing this for probably longer than me, honestly. It says 25 years, but I don't believe that. I think like just in getting to know Mike, he's he's got so much wisdom and knowledge, and he's just helped. You see the numbers there. He's just helped so many teams, so many companies with their products and with their businesses. There's his contact info at the bottom. You should go and connect with him. He's super smart, amazing guy. He also taught at Pragmatic in a former life. So, Mike, anything to add?
No, you did great. I feel a little bit embarrassed or humbled by the intro, but I appreciate that. I think the only emphasis is that I just enjoy this work and I enjoy watching people progress in their life cycle of becoming great product managers.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, cool. So, with that, let's talk about what we came here to talk about today, folks. And so we've got a lot. We're going to go fast and furious because there's so much we want to be able to share with you guys. But I have this slide up so everyone can see the slide, right? Just holler and let me know if you can. It is being shared. But this was the genesis of this particular topic. I posted this on LinkedIn where I just talked about, hey, let's just stop using the soft, euphemistic, or self-important language that we often do in product management. And I had that little image or cheat sheet or whatever you want to call it there on the right that I attached to the post where I gave some examples. It's a lot of the terminology that we end up using within product. And the reality is that there's a complete disconnect from what the rest of the organization, particularly executives, particularly those on the commercial side, the language that they care about. And this post kind of seemed to resonate pretty strongly. When I took this snapshot, it was a little over 5,000. I think it's at 6,000 or more at this point. And that actually was when Mike reached out and said, "Hey, we should do a topic about this," because it's obviously pretty popular. So that was kind of the genesis. Let's unpack that a little bit, right? There's sort of this idealism that we have in product management, the things that we like to talk about versus what leadership talks about, right? So here's a little bit of a word cloud that I made, and a lot of those terms will be familiar to you. If you're in product, those terms are very familiar, I'm sure, right? And here's what leadership talks about. They talk about revenue, sales velocity, customer success, retention, expansion, ROI, margin, cost, valuation. That's the stuff they care about. That's the stuff they talk about, which translates to money. And it's really funny, like, Mike, I don't know if you've experienced this, but like for some reason in product management, I found we get really uncomfortable talking about money and about business. I don't know why, but it just makes us very squeamish to talk about that. But the reality is that when you're running a business, a for-profit business, that's ultimately what it's about. And I know you've been in these circles for a long time. Like you tell me, like when you're sitting in those executive meetings, when you're sitting in those board meetings, when you're sitting with investors, like they ain't talking about product mindset or backlogs or MVP or they're not really talking about that stuff at the end of their user journeys. Not to say those aren't important, means to an end, but at the end of the day, it comes down to some form of money.
Shardul, you're 100% right. And your smartest execs, your C-suite people, they're not ignorant of the product development process or the things that have to go on. It's just that when you're sitting and there are probably people on this session that have sat in that seat, you cannot be consumed with this level of detail. You're using the language of your board, you're using the language of your investors, and you're using the language that keeps the business going, and that is the language of money. It's the language of things that are around that. So to get caught up and shift away from that is a distraction. So you're absolutely right. We
Yeah.
love to get in our inside baseball rooms, and I probably geek out on this as hard as anybody else and everybody else and talk about the backlog, the implications of the sprint, the implications of the user story, the implications of the epics, the velocity. And those are fun topics because it's about problem solving. But we have to, I call it code switch. When we get into the executive ranks, it's pause, flush all that out of your mind and start talking about consequences on revenue, consequences on ROI, consequences on margins. You can bring those conversations in about the product, but they have to be dumbed down. I don't mean to say that executives are dumb, but they have to be thinned out. And you have to show the linkage, even if it seems obvious to you, show the linkage between release velocity and the ability to keep churn down. You have to build that bridge for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And in fact, if any of you on the call are in a leadership position or aspiring for a leadership position, this becomes even more doubly more important, right? You have to be able to talk this this language. So, and we're gonna try and like give you some tactics around that. But just to kind of continue on this big picture, right? So, we love our, or I guess I love my two by two matrices, but we love just go on LinkedIn or go on any podcast or social media where they talk about product management. We love to debate about these guiding concepts and principles. We spend so much time there. We love to play with systems and patterns and methodologies. We get obsessed with different methodologies, different product development processes. Not to say those aren't important. They're important because you have to be able to execute at the end of the day. A lot of us get stuck down here in the bottom right, with execution tasks. But where we need to be is up here. Now, granted, part of that is maybe culture, empowerment. There's a bunch of things to unpack there. But a big part of that is even just using the right language, as Mike was talking about, right? Or doing that code switch. So connecting your work, our product work, to the things that really, really matter. And this is really important because this is the disconnect that's happening, not just between product management and leadership, or like executives, or even the folks on the commercial side, but even within the product management community itself. So you talk to PMs, and I know both Mike and I get to talk to people in product management every single day. PMs will keep talking about things like feeling undervalued, treated like delivery managers, buried in daily tasks, that hey, I'm being disempowered or I'm not empowered. And you talk to product leaders, especially like product executives, they'll say, hey, I want strategic PMs. Or they're often paying this, what Mike and I started calling the translation tax, right? They're taking the stuff that their PMs are saying, and they're actually translating that into exec speak. And they're spending so much. I know I had to do a lot of this myself, and it gets a little exhausting. And what it ends up doing is eroding a lot of the trust.
I was going to chime in and respond. If
Yeah.
you are a leader and you are doing translation for your team, it's a career limiting move. Your boss, your executives are not stupid. They know what you're doing, and it's a really bad reflection on your leadership style. And so I'm just saying, if you're doing that, and Shardul, I know you know this because we've talked about it. That's a short term solution to a big problem, and it can't sustain it. So anyway, I'm sorry. I just wanted to offer that up, Shardul.
Now, actually,
I,
this is a great segue to handing it over to you to talk about this pivot.
So I'm going to start acknowledging the fact, and we all feel this, and we've all been in this space. If you've been in this space for more than 7 to 10 years, at least 5 to 7 years, probably closer to, you feel the pivot. You feel what change is happening. And it's not happening on one thread, it's happening on many threads. And it's accelerated by things like AI. AI is not the reason for the pivot, it's just an accelerant. And this is natural. So Shardul teased out, said, looks like he's been in the business longer than 25 years, possibly so. I've seen a few of these pivots, and they're natural and they're part of the process. So what if you've been in this business for longer than 10 years, you know that there was a time when we were being asked to do a lot of things that were outward facing. And in a 10-year cycle, we switched to an inward facing cycle that was more about velocity, backlog, release, because the macro environment we're living in was all about put it out there and people will consume it. There was this high demand for consumption of SaaS applications, SaaS tools, SaaS related data, and all you had to do was release it and people would consume it. And we've moved past that. And so the pivot is investors, board members, the market itself, even our buyers are asking us to move back. So
Mhm.
now the new focus is about outcome management. It's about predictive metrics. Some people will laugh at that, but I've sat with C-suite executives and say, can't we get to a place where we can forecast what the return on investment for a product initiative is? And that sounds, for us, that sounds funny almost, but that's the ask. And I'm not saying it's realistic, but that's what's going on. Heavy emphasis on business ROI. And our buyers have decided they don't want to talk to salespeople. So they're asking us to figure out how to engage buyers more through the product. And this is all about outbound focus. And as a result, I think we've had to come to a place where we have to recognize that there is, and Shardul talked about this friction, this gap, and this thing that's going on that basically says if you're a product leader today, you feel this probably more than if you run a team. If you have a team of 5 PMs or a team of combination of PMs and POs, you feel this stronger than anything else. You're being asked to do extra work to justify your headcount. You're being asked to do extensive research to validate what you have on your roadmap is actually going to come to fruition. It's going to mean something. And you sense this lack of alignment, this lack of connection between you and sales, between you and business, the business side of the organization. And in some cases, and I've talked to product leaders, they feel their influence in the organization has been reduced, and they're actually being asked to do more tactical and less strategic things. And it's just, again, it's the nature of the ship, it's the nature of the pivot. And what a leader has to do in this case is really think about how to resolve this. And I know you hear a lot of people talking about, hey, we just need to do more things about outcomes. We need to talk about outcomes versus outputs. That's the correct framing. But Shardul, I want to give you some practical, intangible things to work with that can help you start that process. Go ahead, Shardul, next slide.
Yeah, one of the things I think I've heard you talk about, Mike, you put it really well, and I'm going to butcher it. But leaders don't need more frameworks; they need fluid language or fluent systems, right?
We we
Concrete
we
plan.
yeah, that's a great setup for the next slide. We have enough frameworks, and every time I talk to someone in product, they're modifying and or amplifying or revising some existing framework, and there are more showing up. And as I say that, I'm going to lean into a framework, so forgive me. But this one I think is appropriate, and I borrowed this and was taught this some years ago by a friend and colleague named Scott Silhorse, who runs a blog called Tyner Blaine. The source is down in the bottom. But he talks about five lenses and the five lenses of how to view the work that product people do. And I'm going to give you kind of the high view of this because this would be a workshop by itself. And Scott actually teaches it, if I'm not mistaken. Um, we product people spend a lot of time, I believe, and I see this, spending time working on feasibility to build and desirability to customers. I think in earnest, good product managers focus on that. They spend time with it. They have an understanding of the customer, maybe not the greatest understanding of the customer, but they care about that. And where we've lacked, where we haven't spent time, and this is back to Shardul's earlier comment about the squeamishness about money, the squeamishness about the business. And in order to get out of this disconnect problem, that's the energy, that's the focus that product teams, product leaders need to win. That's the muscle that needs to be built up. Um, the idea is to get to a place where you can synthesize these three things: the customer, the feasibility problem, and the business. And by I say viable to the business, I'm talking about being selfish. It's our business. It's your employer's business. It's the place where you work, and that translates into money. That's the bottom line on that. Yes, customer health is important, NPS is important. Yes, some of the other things are, but at the end of the day, the measure of success for this is going to be the production of profits, the growth of revenue, the reduction of expense. That's just the way businesses work. And so what by picking up these terms, and Shardul's post was amazing because it, from the response, obviously generated and hit a chord with everybody, is to understand how to do that. It's one thing to say, okay, I'll stop talking about velocity and start talking about revenue. And I think some of the squeamishness, if you will, that Shardul talks about is we as product teams, product leaders, product managers, we don't want to own the forecast. Absolutely not. We don't want to commit to the forecast, but we should be able to have a conversation about this in a way, just like your sales team will talk about features. They don't own the delivery, but they'll get in your grill and tell you whether or not a customer likes what you've built. And they don't own the outcome, they don't own the inputs, but they'll tell you what's working and what's not. And in a similar sort of way, we as product people need to step forward and have the financial conversation. And I'm going to show you some techniques on how to do that. But
Mi-
this is where we are. Yes, go ahead.
Mike, if I could, just two quick things to add to what you just said, because I think it's really important. One is that you were talking about forecasting. I had a CFO who was very kind. He was a great mentor for me, and because I was younger in my career and I was busting on like, well, this is all made up and assumptive and like there's no way to know and guarantee that it's gonna generate $1 million or $10 million or whatever, right? And what he told me is that, sometimes we're just trying to get a sense, like an order of magnitude. What are we talking about here? Because we're making an investment, whether it's an investment in a new market, a new product, or a feature or an enhancement to an existing product. Either way, uh, it is an investment. We are allocating money, resources, effort, sweat, tears, all that stuff. Are we allocating that towards a $1,000 opportunity, 10,000, 100,000, like because we have choices. We can allocate it, we can do that, we can do A or we can do B. We just need a sense of that. It's not saying that I'm going to hold your feet to the fire necessarily. I mean, there are times where that does happen, but for most of us on this call that we're not sitting in that chair, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is that this diagram here Reminds me of one of my favorite Venn diagrams. Favorite because I hate it the most. That classic UX technology business, and you are here in the center. I've always hated that diagram. So if anybody on this call loves that, apologies, fight me. But I hate it. And here's one of the I could do an hour just on that. But one of my peeves is it shows this arrow saying you're in the center. And guess what? You look at everything we talk about in product management. We'll talk tech, we'll talk UX, but we never talk about the business side, right? So this
I,
viable to the business, I think, is an incredibly important point that you're making here. So
under this high level intro, if you go check out that article I mentioned, it shows 5 things that product managers must, I won't say the word isn't own, but let's say must have responsibility or accountability or at least be informed about. Obviously, the customer landscape. The other part is a competitive landscape. So it gets to Shardul's story. If we're building something that's going to generate, we believe will generate $1 million in additional revenue, but 6 competitors already have it, why would we ever put that on a roadmap? We might, but we'd have to come up with some different way to articulate what we're going to gain from it. Operational performance. That's all of your DevOps stuff. That's accessibility to the platform, obviously technology. But the most important thing is the health of the product. And the health of the product is always going to be led. Clearly, QA is a factor, but the financial health of the product is the most important factor in a business. So, with that said, I think we want to ground this in a way that says we don't believe that in order to do this work, you have to become a mathematician or financial analyst. In fact, I would advise, please hit the next slide, hit the button there. I would advise you don't do those things, that you don't end up putting yourself in a position of doing the financial departments, your FP&A department's work. One, it won't go well for you. They won't
mm,
trust you with the numbers. Two, you're actually missing an opportunity to develop a great ally in your FP&A because they have data and information that you will never get your arms around. They just go talk to them and you'll find out. But if you can start putting together some basic assumptions with the backing of your FP&A department, with the sound advice of your FP&A department, you can start having a money conversation that's at the level that you're comfortable with, makes sense to your executives, and doesn't hold you accountable for the financial outcomes, which is not what you want. Next slide. Hit the button again.
and
Go
folks,
ahead.
we're gonna share some heuristics with you guys.
Absolutely right.
Just
Uh,
to give you some tactics that you can use to do exactly what Mike just talked about.
You don't want to turn this into an old-fashioned stage gate process either. And so these are things where we get process and analytics running amok. And we're talking about light touches. We're talking about thought experiments. We're talking about ways to look at this that allow us to do things that make sense so that you're not stopping for days or weeks to crunch out things that you can't possibly know the answers to. So next slide, Shardul, if you don't mind. You can do excellent work by making some reasonable, simple, and I don't mean simplistic, but simple assumptions about what you're looking at. I'm going to share one with you in a couple of slides. And you can do some amazing things by just having very clear, specific financial impacts. And those financial impacts can run a broad range of things. It's not just about revenue, and it's not just about cost savings. There's a lot of room in there to play this out. And I'm going to tease out and have you start thinking about ways in which you can look at your product initiatives and your roadmaps and start connecting the dots on the economics of it. Next slide, if you don't mind. So clearly, these are the obvious ones. Economic benefits, and notice I don't call in a grouping, I don't call it financial, I call it economic benefits. That also takes the sting out of just threading this into a financial discussion. Economic benefits are broader than financial benefits. They all count, though. Revenue impact is an obvious one. I won't read that list to you. Cost savings is an obvious one. If we can get a change in the architecture that reduces our AWS costs, that's real dollars. That's cash delivered. That's valuable. If we can reduce the effort and the energy or the cost of maintaining our product by getting more efficient about it, that's obviously an advantage. And then the other things on the right side are all more about operational efficiency, operational excellence, and being smart about how we deploy and how we manage that process. Those are all the things that are available to us to look at for starting to have the conversation about the economic benefit of the features that we want to produce. I want to start then by going back to something though that starts at the beginning. How do I do this? If I wait till the end, if I get down to the end of the process, the feature, the platform release is a month away, and I start trying to do this, I'm in trouble. So
Mhm.
I'm going to suggest you need to roll back to the beginning. This needs to be embedded in your process of how you start building product from the get-go. Next slide. Can you hit the next slide for
And
me?
we talk about discovery a lot, right? Customer discovery. There's a, you know, just to double down on that same word, there's sort of like a discovery on the business or financial side or the economic side that we need to do up front. And granted, some of it is assumptive, but that's a part of it to your point, Mike.
Yes, for sure. So I put this heuristic here, and Shardul and I went back and forth, kind of discussing the best way to present it. We both came to an agreement. Product managers, and I've been in the room, I've been the one. We love to solution. We love to see a problem, hold it up for as long as we can stand to hold it up, and then start jumping to prototyping, writing stories, talking to dev about how fast they can get a prototype or a working prototype or some form of an MVP ready. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that you need to stand back for this purpose and use something I call problem thinking, which is defining the problem and spending more time on the problem. Something that you took it in whatever course you did, is it's all about defining problems and getting real clear on the purpose, getting real clear on the idea of shifting from a project to a problem. A project has a beginning, middle, end. We take what we've got in terms of requirements and we build out until we're complete. A problem as a life cycle, elongated life cycle. So does your product. And so problems will morph and come back in different ways. So getting the idea of thinking about this in this way, I think is critical. I won't read this to you, but I just dropped down. Clarity on purpose is critical. Specifics about who is impacted by this problem. It's not a customer, that's too broad. It's a buyer or it's a user. With this pivot we're talking about and an emphasis, and I talk to product leaders all over, and they say they're being nudged, in some cases enticed, in some cases pushed to get more engaged in a go-to-market cycle. So now buyers become critically important to what we bring into the problem space, that the expectation is we have to have a better way of engaging buyers. I mean, if you look at some of the things that are being done in AI, that's what that's all about, is if we can get fine-grained segmentation of who our buyers are, get to a point where we understand them well enough to have personalization of application and uses and use cases, then we can put something in front of a buyer before they ever say yes that will entice them to use our capabilities because it solves a very demonstrable, visible problem for them. That's where our industry is going. And then the last couple of pieces here, impact, it's certainly outcome oriented, but it's also focusing on, if we don't solve this problem, what will happen? And that gives you magnitude. That sort of sets up the mechanism to get to the benefits, which are economic benefits. And I've laid those out at the bottom. And so framing this in this way is a good way for a team, an individual, but classically a team, to start having these conversations. If I were a leader of a team in this environment today, I would take a hubris or a heuristic like this, and I would start having sessions with my PMs in a group forum and start to entertain problems in this way. Because again, I said earlier, the muscle we need to build is the business acumen, financial acumen discussion. And this is how we start to frame it. Shardul, I don't know if you have something you want to add to this, but
No, just real quick, I think the point about shifting from project thinking to problem thinking, we love to talk about this, but I think rarely do we really, know how to like translated that into action. And I think product leaders can be guilty as well. Like you look at a roadmap and it's just a series of projects, right? And your point about problem is a life cycle. Project has a beginning and an end. Problem has a life cycle, right? Solving a problem in the marketplace may involve one or more projects.
Without a doubt. Absolutely.
And so the if you kind of take it back to um, impact, right? The impact may like a one if a problem is being solved through a series of projects, which can happen, like a series of features or a series of releases or whatever, right? The impact may be felt at the end of delivering all of those. Hopefully, each project is providing incremental value along the way, right? So, like, that's one of the things I see, even like product leaders, those in leadership positions sometimes get caught in this and they just get focused in on the project delivery part of it instead of taking that step back on the original problem.
Go back for just a second, because you made a point I think I want to double down on because I think it's so significant. You made it, the comment you made was most of the time our problems that we solve or features will run through multiple projects. Well, what happens if you start building for a feature or solving a problem in quarter one of the current year? And by the time you get to mid-year, the dynamic of the problem has changed. You delivered on the first phase. It was well received. You've got all these resources lined up for the back end of the year to keep going, but something has changed. The priority has changed. The economics have changed. It's reasonable then to go back to the table and look at the remaining work you have and run it through this rubric or this heuristic to see, is it still as valuable as it was 6 months ago? Invariably, we have these things change. And we've also, those of us who've been around, have seen, so to speak, the engineering train leave the station and something happens in a marketplace, something happens with a competitor, and engineering is running headlong, as they should, on a project that we know early on is not going to deliver what we want. This is the way to stop it. Pull the emergency cord, disband the team, refocus the team, whatever is necessary. Usually it's not a disbanding, but it is a refocusing so that we don't end up with something where we spent millions of dollars producing that we know in advance is not going to have the impact that we thought it would. That's the role. That's the strategic part of this job that product management and only product management can do. Your engineering teams will not do that. So let's keep going. So I took a hypothetical, summed up this. A SaaS company launches a reservation app for restaurant reservation app, and 2 months later, the app crashes. We don't know why, but 98% of all the new customers stop using the app because they cannot book the restaurant of their choice. That's the full clarity and understanding of the problem. If you have 20,000 users and 98% of them suddenly stop using the app, I'll give you a little extra in there. Let's say it's a consumption-based pricing model. So they only pay for successfully booked reservations. Now we
Mhm.
have a business at risk, right? It's massive. It has to be affected. It has to be found. Who's affected? Aside from our business, any patron who wants to book additional business. We all know word of mouth. If the word gets out that this super app that books you into these high-end restaurants for a fee suddenly stops working, you won't be able to sign up any new customers. So now your business is sitting totally exposed. If only 2% are using the app, that means 90% of your revenue is at risk. That's the impact. So if we don't fix this problem, we know that eventually the business will go away. And I set this up sort of sense of urgency and, the sky is falling just to get your attention. So how would we pose the benefits of this? If we can increase through a solution a 10x increase in the number of users who will use the app. We come up with the workaround. So they don't get their restaurant of choice. They get a restaurant within 1 block of where they would want to go. They don't get the restaurant of their choice because that's a Michelin 2-star and they can't get in there for 6 months. We give them another Michelin 1-star that's a mile away. However we decide to do that, those are solutions, and I'm not trying to propose those. We could position this as having an impact of 10x increasing revenue. And when we communicate like this, when we talk this way among ourselves, we enable ourselves to understand clearly what we're building and why. We understand the sense of urgency about it. And we can understand how this relates to the financial impact of the business. I'm not suggesting you're going to own the outcome. Notice I use the word potential and the word could. That's getting, if this is my plan, that's getting me off the hook for owning the actual Stripe transaction that goes through that ends up on the balance sheet. I'm proposing this as a way of organizing thoughts and getting clear. What's really important, if you're running a team, if you're a senior level of a team or a team leader, you've got these things coming in all the time. You come in and there's always many things like this. So how do we decide which ones to go with and which ones to put on hold and which ones to say need to do more work? Shardul, I don't know if you want to add something, but my move through is saying, and since I'm glad Shardul opened up to the idea of owning and loving 2x2 grids, because I do too. But as a leader in this context, what I want to be able to do is have a conversation with my team internally. This is internal tools. This is not something that goes to the board. And start identifying those problems that show up with great clarity and high impact versus those that are noise and distraction. If I can separate those two things out, then I'm 100% ahead of the game. And if I can take my team and start having conversations about economic impact, and yes, a little financial discussion, don't need to get an MBA for that. You can take an online course from Udemy of financial principles for non-financial people, or any combination of things, or go into a couple of YouTube series, and you can pick up the nomenclature, enough of it to keep you interested. And more importantly, and this is actually direct response to a question that came up earlier, looks like it was from Depro, is that in order to facilitate this, in order to be competent, to be viewed as competent, you have to know your business. So fundamental financial principles are important. Do you know what ROI is? Do you know what EPS is? Do you know, I mean, those terms, do you know what a balance sheet is? Do you know how to read an income statement? Those are useful. They're useful. Do you know what cash flow is in relation? Do you know understand what CAC is and CAC payback is? Those are useful. But your company's interpretation of those ratios, those metrics, and how your company uses those ratios and those metrics to navigate the business is going to be unique to your business. There are standards, but there will be significant nuances and deviations that your company will have. And the commentary is that we have to, as product managers, start to understand the business of our business better than we do today. I was sitting in a session with a client, and this was a problem. And I started out by asking people around the table, the virtual table, what's the revenue of the company? And there were 7 people at the table. 3 of them knew. That's incredulous, in my opinion. I asked them what the price of their product was. You're the owner of this product. What does it sell for? And the first response was, I think it goes for, you're the owner of this product. You can't think about the price. You should be intimately involved with it. Those are the gaps that can be closed. Those are the gaps that must be closed. How long is the sales cycle? Not clear. How many competitors are out there in space? Unsure. Those are the things that we can own and we can take responsibility for, and there's nobody that's going to stop us. Nobody's going to tell us you don't belong in this area. And as we do that, along with some of the things that Shardul and I have shared, I'm going to continue to share over the next 20 minutes, then you can start to close this gap. The leader of the team can stop doing translation because your team is going to get a lot smarter. And I'm going to throw in a little chaff in here. And if you're the leader of a team or you're an individual product manager and you start taking this on seriously, things will start to happen for you that are different. Your team's going to show up at the meeting and it's just going to sound different than the other 3 product teams. You're going to have different level conversations when you go into QBR. You're going to have different results. And somebody's going to walk me and say, what are you doing over there? What's happening to your team? Because you guys have absolutely in the last 90 days changed how you approach the business. And that's I've been there. That's a great place to be in when you can start seeing the dynamic of your team start to change and start to move forward. That's when you gain influence. that's when you gain a strategic seat at the table. Those are the things that start to happen from learning your business better than you do right now, having some first principles like financial and economic principles teamed with templates and tools like this one and ones that Shardul has coming up next, and you start to see this change. I've said enough here. Shardul, I'll hand this back to you.
And this is great. I'm writing now a series for my Saturday newsletter for my paid subscribers, a series of essays that unpack revenue from a product management standpoint, because not all revenue is created equal. But to your earlier point, revenue fluency is absolutely critical to be able to do. So on that point, um, Uh, let me see. I'm gonna go through a bunch of stuff. Let me see if I can do it in the next 10 minutes or 6 minutes. Because I want to make sure we give enough time for questions, and I see some people are already putting them in. So, um, let's go back. There's a lot of, in my opinion, somebody mentioned they like my hot takes. Here's another one. There's a lot of bad definitions of product management out there. Okay, so I'm a pretty simple guy, and this is my simple definition, right? What is your primary job as a product manager or as a product management team? Is to drive the sustainable business growth of the product. And the way you do that is by delivering what I call monetizable customer value. Not just value that helps the user, but obviously it needs to benefit the user, clearly. But from a business standpoint, it needs to be monetizable. It needs to generate an ROI for the business in some fashion, directly or indirectly. And so I believe our number one performance metric is ROI. By the way, I'm a man of my word. Several of the companies I've joined were as a product leader, and then I was told, "Hey, what are the KPIs or OKRs or what are the goals for the team for the year?" And I would sign up to some kind of an ROI or revenue metric, believe it or not. So let's unpack that a little bit. So, and this is kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, but hopefully it helps things. When we talk about ROI from a product standpoint, we're talking about how quickly can we make a return on the money that's being invested in developing and delivering our product. And there's two aspects to that. There's net revenue growth, which is all about how fast is our revenue growing, and there's margin velocity. How quickly can we earn profitable revenue, right? Earn the profit back or some return back on that money that we're investing. So now this is a bit of a busy slide, so I'll just walk you through it at a high level, right? If you break that down from a revenue standpoint, there's really three aspects to it. Getting new customers, keeping those customers, and being able to expand the relationship, getting them to buy more, right? From a financial standpoint, the middle row here is a sampling of different types of financial metrics. The ones for your business can vary, right? These are not universally true. Like SKUs sold may not be relevant for a SaaS business, right? Necessarily, but it might be very relevant for a retail or e-commerce business, for example, right? We need to know these as a product management team. So starting from product leadership, you need to understand this. You need to communicate this to your PMs. And as PMs, you need to be asking about this. Your day-to-day work may or may not directly lead to moving these metrics, right? And that's where the bottom row comes. A lot of us spend our time on these so-called product metrics, right? And that's important, but we need to understand it's not just enough to like move the metric. We need to understand why is that metric important. So I was coaching a product manager, and she's in health tech, and she was telling me that I my goal is to help make it easier for our providers, healthcare providers, to schedule patients. So that's her metric, right? The ease of scheduling. And she had some time frame for that, right? How much time does it take? And I asked her, okay, well, why is that important? I mean, intuitively, instinctively, it kind of makes sense, but why is that really important for the business? And she couldn't explain it. So we had to unpack that and connect the dots back to how it actually impacted the customer relationship and revenue, both on the customer side and the provider's own pocket. Because not to get too much into it, but a lot of providers get paid fee for service, right? So being able to schedule lots of patients on the same day becomes super important, right? So that's what this means, and so that's where you have to unpack it and understand that. If we break it down on the margin velocity side, again, a simplistic model, but a good way to think about it is there's product development and there's product delivery. In product management, We spend an enormous amount of time just thinking about this and talking about the product development side, right? But even there, I talk to PMs and I'll ask them, do you know how much your team costs? Like how many people do you have in your team? Oh, I work with, I've got 5 engineers or 10 engineers, a couple of designers, whatever. Maybe a QA person. Okay, what's the cost of that team? No idea. On an annual or quarterly basis, I said, look, you need to know. You need to know that. So you need to go get that information. And if you're a product leadership, you need to translate that for your PMs, right? Because that is the investment. So every time you're working on a release, if you're running Agile, if you're doing Scrum, if you're doing sprints, whatever, right? There is a cost. This is why we are prioritizing things on the roadmap. We are constantly making this calculation, knowingly or unknowingly, better to do it knowingly, that, hey, how do we get the biggest bang for the buck over the next phase of the roadmap, the next release, the next sprint? That's the mindset. On the delivery side, there's a number of aspects. Mike kind of unpack that, but essentially there's customer implementation or onboarding. This again can vary. If it's retail, it's straightforward because the customer's going to come buy the thing, walk out the store, done, right? But if you're enterprise SaaS, there's a big cost on customer implementation, right? Infrastructure costs, third-party software, all of this stuff goes into affecting the margin, the profitability of the product, right? And so here's a one example of how the big top line goals can align with the initiatives we're working on a day-to-day basis, right? If most of us in product management, most product managers, like they may know the revenue goal at the top line, because the CEO comes out, maybe there's an all hands, right? Annual all hands, and he or she comes out and says, we're going to grow by 20%. So, this is our revenue goal for the year. Great. But then what's the translation to your day-to-day work? You're working on all these different initiatives. How does that connect? Right? So that gets lost. So as a product manager, you need to figure out, you need to ask the questions to connect these dots. And if you're in product leadership, your job is to help them do this. Take that big number, understand what that big number is. How does that translate into big product goals? This is just an example here. It could be whatever makes sense for your business, for your product. And then how does it translate to the different metrics or initiatives, right? Some product managers, like I mentioned earlier, are moving certain metrics, maybe NPS or maybe it's uptime or whatever. How does that translate back to the big goals? Here's another view of someone. By the way, these two slides are from actual companies I was at, right? Few things are changed for confidentiality reasons, but this is pretty much how we broke it down. Okay. So as a product leader, you want to identify and assign your PMs to the right set of metrics and initiatives that help achieve the big company objectives, right? And you need to basically connect their work back to these outcomes. This is an ongoing exercise. So let me go through, and then I'll pause for questions, I promise. Let me go through some quick examples on like impact estimation, right? The goal is to get a rough order of magnitude. You want to find 2 to 3 numbers that you can quickly multiply. And all you're trying to do is get an idea of, look, is this a 4-digit idea, a 5-digit suggestion, or a 7-digit opportunity? What are we looking at, right? And we're just trying to get a sense of how impactful is this so that we can decide, is this even worth doing? So we don't need deep financial analysis or precision, as Mike talked about earlier. In fact, the specific number sometimes is even less important because we are multiplying guesses. We're just trying to be directionally accurate. And this way we can kind of ignore 85% of the incoming requests so we can put more, discovery and effort into the top 15% that are actually strategically aligned, right? So here's a very simple one, increasing sales, right? Guesstimate the number of deals lost due to a lack of, that feature. Guesstimate the percent we could realistically win if we had that capability, multiplied by the average new buyer price. Mike talked about understanding your pricing model, right? And so this is just an example. Whether that's worth it or not is going to depend on your business goals and what else may be competing for your resources and for your roadmap, right? But this is a very simple way we can start doing a quick analysis without like torturing a spreadsheet. Here's one on upselling, right? Current total customer base, how many upgrades could you estimate? What's the upsell price? That's the guesstimated impact, right? And then you can match that against the cost. If it costs us, in this specific example, okay, this is a $2.9 million impact. If it costs us 200K a year, that might be a good win, right? But if we're spending 4 million, we should probably pass on that, right? Here's an example of bug fix. There's lots of different ways to be able to estimate the impact of bug fixes. One big way is reducing support costs. How many tickets are we getting based on this bug? Multiplied by the expected improvement. You can do this with your support team. They know what they cost, right? And then multiply by the cost per ticket, and you'll get some number, right? Some product managers work on internal stuff, right? There's some internal cost saving requests are usually about a tool or an app or a process that's going to help our internal employees be able to do more or work faster or do better work, right? So, like a smarter search tool will help our support team find solutions to frequent customer issues faster and reduce time to close tickets. That's an example, right? So, or we're manually checking all the mortgage applications that have poor credit scores because our automated approval system gets these wrong. So we need to fix that, right? Those are some examples. So you can do a quick back of the envelope calculation to be able to do that. And then this is a quick NPS example, right? A lot of us chase NPS, but the question becomes, why is that even important? And so it could be helping to increase retention. It could be helping to drive referrals through word of mouth or expansion revenue. So I've been at companies where NPS was identified as a top line goal. It became important to understand, hey, if we moved NPS or whatever your CSAT metric may be by a point, what is the impact? And there's an example there at the bottom, right? That you can do some quick math, right? Hey, here's what we think, generally what the lifetime value of a customer is. This is the size of our customer base. We think this proposed feature could raise NPS by 3 points. Historically, a 1 point lift results in a 0.5% better retention. Do the math. This is what we think we can achieve in terms of preserved revenue, right? So let's go into quick key takeaways. Mike, I'm going to challenge us to do this like in 30 seconds if we can, if we can get to some Q&A.
Real quickly, less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Start talking economic benefit, direct economic benefit. Embrace the money conversation. Embed the money conversation in your process, in your product thinking, problem discovery process. Don't go overboard on the calculations. You don't need a mathematical degree to do this. Reasonable assumptions, you've seen some examples. It's really arithmetic. The biggest challenge is getting to be an expert in your own business functioning about how those numbers and what those numbers mean to your business. And then rinse and repeat. Every phase of the process as you go through, you should be looking at this economic benefit conversation prior to building, prior to releasing, prior to launching. I'd say at the launch point, it's most critical because that's where the rubber meets the road. Did that take 30 seconds or less?
That was great. I'm just going to leave folks with some action steps, just to build on what Mike just said. So if you're a product manager, individual product manager, create money stories. You don't need to go into complex business cases, for the most part. Compare order of magnitude, contextualize it as Mike talked about to your organization. Learn finance and economics. You don't have to become a CFO or financial analyst, but just enough to demonstrate competence. Do dry runs with your manager or a mentor, right? Especially if you're going into an executive conversation, and take the feedback well. I should probably do a session on that. Like, how do you take feedback well? And if you're in product leadership, I know Mike talked a lot about this, but your job is to educate your PMs on the business model, on the outcomes and results that are respected in your organization. Teach them how to speak commercial speak or exec speak. Do those dress rehearsals or dry runs with your PMs and provide direct and constructive feedback. And you need to repeatedly connect their work to the bigger strategy and goals, not just annually, but quarterly in team meetings, one-on-one. When you're hiring, I know there's like a lot of popularity now, oh, we should check on vibe coding and things like that. And that's fine if you want to do that. But hire based on outcomes, the ability to deliver outcomes, business judgment, their leadership potential. Evaluate performance based on their ability to deliver those outcomes, not just an efficiency of performing a task or output. Okay. So we'll pause here on questions. I'm going to say a couple quick last things. If you guys are interested in more events, we've got a whole bunch more. Go to this URL, streetsmartproductmanager.com/events. I'll email it to you later on as well. We've got a whole bunch more. I've got a newsletter. Some of you have subscribed. If you haven't, check it out here, streetsmartproductmanager.com. There's a free version, but there's some paid versions where you get a lot more resources. So with that, I also have some examples, by the way, of how to talk about your value, which I will send you. I'll email these examples to you guys so you have them. You can take the same thing that we normally do and how you can rephrase it in business terms. So I know we're hitting up on time. So here's what we're going to do. And I know a bunch of you had questions. We're going to get to your questions. I'm happy to stay around. I will let you go at the top of the hour because I know everyone is very busy. I'm happy to stick around and try and address as many questions. Mike, I'll leave it to you. If you got a bail buddy, then obviously go. But if you
I've
can
got
sit.
a few minutes, happy to sit.
All right, here's what I'll ask. I'm going to go to the chat because I know a number of people were putting questions in the chat. Feel free to raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you one at a time. So let's see. I know Depayan, I think, was one of the first ones. So Deepan is asking, when a product team has lost trust because it kept shipping things that didn't really move the needle, what's the first thing you do to rebuild that trust,
I
both
think
with stakeholders and within the team? What a great
that's
question.
a great question. I love it. It takes courage to admit that, first of all. So you have a broken product team and you need to rebuild it. If you're still there, it means that you've done a good job. There's a lot of PM leaders, executives, and even senior PMs don't survive that. I would say start with some of the things we've outlined. I wouldn't necessarily start communicating how you're going to change things externally yet, but I'd pull the team together and start rebuilding. And what have we learned? What can we do differently? What tools are available? And there are a lot of tools available in this space now, so you can do a lot of self-starting. And the most important thing, if you are the leader of that team, is your role has to shift to learning. You have to become the lightning rod for driving the team to learn and learn from your mistakes. We've talked about some things that we think can help close gap. Learn your business, first of all. That's priority number one. And then selectively use some of the tools that Shardul has offered up, some of the ones that I've talked about, and start pulling the pieces together. And when you have momentum, when you start rehearsing internally and start talking about how you want to change things in relationships to others. So you go to sales, marketing, and the other stakeholders and peers in the organization and start having different level of conversation with them, but
And
not before you're ready.
yeah, just to add to that also, like, I think, especially if you're in a leadership position, product leadership position, don't assume that even the executives understand everything about the business or the business model.
There,
Now they might, they should. I mean, certainly
there.
the CEO's job is to know the business model. The CRO will, from like at least the sales standpoint, revenue generation standpoint, how the revenue model works. But as a product leader, sometimes you may need to educate them a little bit and do a bit of translation on that side. As an example, how does the current pricing structure impact our product development? Or here's another one that's one of my favorites. The current sales commission structure is actually a detriment to our product strategy because our product teams are being, I'm sorry, excuse me, our sales team is being incentivized to sell different things or things that are less strategic than what we're saying are strategic in the product. So you may need to like educate them a little bit on that to help connect those dots. All right, so let's see. Conrad. Conrad has a question. I don't know if Conrad's still on. I see him still on. Okay, if I'm in the SaaS company, is this framed as a hypothetical to spotlight the risk of downtime? Conrad, I think you were asking this question when Mike had his problem space slide on, right? If I'm not mistaken, is that the
That's
context
exactly,
you're
yeah,
asking?
I
Yeah.
think that's correct. So it's an interesting question, and I think it's a fair question, but then I'm going to go back to almost the essence of this talk. You think downtime, your C-suite thinks loss of revenue. And you have to make that distinction. Downtime, when you talk about downtime, believe it or not, that's an abstract, can be an abstract comment to some executives. They think that it's like lights are out, SaaS companies are utilities, right? When the lights aren't working, there's no billing going on. And so putting this in a context of downtime, I think, is important to understand what sense of urgency, what task you do, what problems, what methods you take to solve the problem. That's the solution side of it. But explaining why this is urgent, and let's say you needed to go out and hire an outside consultant to fix this problem, you need to translate that into money so that the exec team understands for every hour we're out. My little example shows at a risk of not, my model said there's a $200,000 a month of revenue in here, 90% of it's gone. Calculate against a 3% natural churn rate per month. It's $190,000 revenue on the table, and no user who's doing the consumption model is going to sit around for more than 30 days to see if you fix this problem. So it's $190,000 of potential revenue. If I were sitting with that problem, I could express that in downtime to my engineering team and my DevOps team, and I would, but I'd also turn to the CFO, the CEO, and the CEO and say, $190,000 per month can disappear in less than 60 days. And I have a little table that shows why it happens. And the longer it takes to solve this problem, the less preservation and recovery we get. So that's the way that's the essence, Conrad. That's the essence of the switching we're talking about. It's a fair question.
That's a terrific example. And just to quickly add to that, it's funny. It's not like the executives, like obviously they don't want downtime. They get it, but we have to remember they're also constantly in a position of making trade-offs, right? Well, I get that, but there's these other things that we want to do to drive revenue, let's say, or boost profitability, or whatever it might be, right? Or here's another real scenario where the big goal was they wanted to go to the next round of funding. This was a startup. So the valuation was important. Getting ready for those investor pitches for their Series B, I think they were going for, became important. So obviously they would say downtime is bad. We don't want downtime. But I had to translate it. To Mike's point, yeah, if we talk to the engineering DevOps team, they're gonna get it. In fact, they're the ones who are gonna be screaming and saying, "We got downtime. Like, how can we not be focused in on this, right?"
Right.
And as product management, we get it. We got to make that translation to make them feel the hurt. Like, no, no, guys, like there is a serious economic impact to our business. So, like, basically, just my short story. There was a lot that went into it, but my short story was like, "Hey, I think this is pretty much going to kill your Series B." Because you see this, you want to get to this revenue number here. Yeah, some of that is going to come through retention, some of that is going to come through new. That ain't going to happen, right? So that valuation number you're trying to get to for the Series B, it's going to be all pretend, and the investors will look right through it. And like that, the founder was like, "Oh, wait a minute, okay, you know what?" And this is literally what he said. "You know what? You just told me this affects my cap table. Got it. Okay." That wasn't the worst. All right, Rupa's got a great question. The problem with being strategic, is Rupa still on? Okay, I see Rupa. Great. The problem with being strategic and stopping the engineering train when it's left the station because the problem has changed is lack of incentive structure. And PMs truly incentivized to not aren't PMs truly incentivized to not build something because it's not too valuable anymore. Ah, and I like Conrad's answer. Uh, okay. What do you got to say about this one, Mike? This is a good one.
You know, I can, so if I take moral high ground, which I'm going to do first, and I won't grandstand on it. I hope when you hire product managers, you hire people with value systems that will do the right things and not just drive for how they get paid. I hope that should be part of your remit of hiring great candidates or pulling people that have good values and will make the right calls because it's the right thing to do for the business. That's what I hope. But given the fact that we do have sometimes incentives that are imbalanced, then I would turn to the leadership and say, we need to change how our product managers are incented to do their job. They're being disincented from doing the right thing. I can think of no job inside an organization that requires a good centering around values than this one. Because your job, and Shardul, you pointed out at the beginning, is to basically make growth happen. But the other piece of that is to help assess and inform people of risk to the business around the product specifically. And so if something's not going to turn out well, I want PMs around me that are saying, and we may not win the political battle on this front, we may lose, but I want them to be able to provide alerts and notification, and then let people with bigger titles and fancier and bigger representation on the cap table make those calls, and not have a PM be able to make a call and say, I'm not incented to stop this. I did go too far on moral ground. I guess the other thing I would offer just real quickly is inspect. If you're the leader of the team, you should be inspecting constantly, using tools and methods that allow you to gain exposure. And if someone feels uncomfortable signaling that something's off, give them a safe place to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. So, I think it was Tom who called me out of my hot take. So Tom, here's another hot take coming your way. So, so there's a pragmatic side to this, Rupa, where like sometimes even if you raise the red flag, right? But for whatever reason, cultural or whatever, you're just sort of kind of being forced to just hit the date and deliver. So sometimes we have to compromise on that. There are things we can do then after the fact to point out that, hey, we didn't get the outcomes we were hoping for, right? Which is where that upfront work becomes uh, pretty important. To Mike's point, if you are in a leadership role and as you go up the chain, like I'm talking, especially if you're getting to an executive or VP plus chief, this is your job. I mean, just flat out. So there was a VP of product that I was mentoring, and he actually got let go because of this, because he was not bold enough to ask the right questions to make the switch midstream. So everyone had decided we're going to do this thing. They began the engineering work. They were headed down, and this happens, right? They just realize, you know what? This is not going to work. This is not the right path. And frankly, and he admitted this himself. He said he was not bold enough to really raise the flag and say, guys, we need to pull the brake on this. We need to reassess. I know we've already committed a bunch of resources. We've spent money, whatever. We are 3 months into the 6 month development, but like we are heading in the wrong direction. And guess what? So he didn't do it. They delivered on the date. He got to his performance review and he said, well, we delivered on all the stuff. And the CEO fired him, let him go. And that was the feedback. The feedback provided was your job as a VP of product is to make sure we are delivering and working on the right set of things. I would have rather you would have come and raised the red flag. Obviously, yes, it would have been a very difficult conversation. Who knows what decision we would have made at the time, but like that's what I expect from you, right?
That's the essence of the trust question, right? Isn't it? That if the
Exactly.
C-suite doesn't trust you to make the right call, there's no way you can get out of being relegated to tactical execution. There's no way you can have influence.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Brent. I don't see Brent on the call. Let's see. Let me see if I can find any other questions from folks on the call before we adjourn. I don't see Brent on the call, but like, let's see. Thoughts on how we communicate value creation or ROI if our product is an enabler product and not saleable, or not a,
That's
not
a
a customer facing product.
right. That's a good question.
Okay, yeah. Well, he's not here, but let's address it anyways for
That may be something somebody else is dealing with as well. I think a lot of I work with companies and have worked with clients where the product team and the development team are doing what I call enabling the delivery of the service, which is it's not the service is not sold. I can think of a lot of companies like that. Payment companies are very much like this. Um, Health tech companies are very much like this. And then it's looking for things that optimize delivery. You alluded to this earlier indirectly. What can we do to the platform or the tool or the capability we have to drive 2 extra points of NPS? Shardul, you've offered that up with a very specific example that we know that if we run, again, go back to running the business model, if we understand the business model relationship between NPS and recurring revenue or NPS and churn, we can start to then have these conversations about that as well. It may be a little more work, maybe a little trickier. And then the other piece are the optimization pieces, reduction in costs, reduction in license fees, reduction in AWS fees. So those things are certainly there.
Yeah. Let's see. Dipro, did I say your name correctly? I hope I said your name correctly.
Yes, you did. Can we go live on audio? Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, by all means.
Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
my last thing wasn't really a question. It's more of I love the session, and I'm just I don't know if you already have this covered in other sessions or not, but I would really love from hearing you guys your perspective on those really tricky and navigating those tough conversations, especially with the sales team and services team when it comes to their comm structures and stuff. I recently come out of a product launch where my executive order was build revenue, then it flipped into maintain ROI, and then it flipped into do all those things at the same time, also meet the 20% sales comp in the year one. Well, you cannot have all those things together. And any kind of rational conversation at that point led to immediate blow-ups. So the product launched, but what happened was all the futuristic roadmap, which was supposed to drive the growth and the ROI would come in year two and year three, because you don't talk about ROI in year one, right? Right. Those got put on hold because of basically the conversation didn't go so well. So
Mm-hmm.
um, just putting it out there, maybe it's a good idea for a future session, but I would really love your perspective on those things. Thank you both.
Yeah. Uh, what do you say to that, Mike?
I I think you alluded to this earlier, and I think, and Deeper, I want to thank you for the question because I like things that kind of make me stop and pause, and that's a question you have to pause. Um, those are tough conversations, and I'm going to be honest. Sometimes they don't go well, right? You're up against the culture now, and Shardul alluded to this. As you go up this hierarchy and you get close to the top and near the top, everybody's got competence at that level. There very rarely will you find people that don't know how to do a version, at least a version of their job. And so some of this comes down to culture and fit. And in some instances, these are some of these battles that we have that aren't, I could say, well, bring data, but if you're talking about an emotional scenario, data is not going to help, right? So it's how to have these tough conversations. And most importantly, if they don't go the way that you believe they should or what you think is intentionally the best thing for the organization, how do you then recover and move forward? And I think to me, that would be a great topic, hour long or best topic to have, because I think there are probably many, many scenarios we could play out. That's my
Yeah.
short answer on that. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Shardul?
Yeah, Deeper, it is so plus one to what Mike said. It is difficult.
Mhm.
Has a lot to do with culture. I think just from your quick description, you seem to be approaching it in the right way, right? You're trying to bring data and facts and information, but sometimes, we don't get everything we want in life. Um, there is an aspect of also showing after the fact, again, in a professional, polite way. You can never say, "Hey, see, I told you so." Haha. That's never going to work. But to show, hey, we didn't get the outcomes we thought, and here's why that didn't work. And then that way, the next time we're trying to make a decision, we can kind of point back to that. So there's I'll call it the tactics we can use. But what I found there is, in fact, the emotional side as well. Um, the personality side, right? It can create a lot of stress, and it can
Yep,
take a
for
toll
sure.
on us personally. So to that end, in fact, one of the sessions I have coming up on the 23rd, 2 weeks from today, is with Sam Greenwood, and he's going to be talking about difficult stakeholder conversations and how you can have resilience. So it may not get directly to your question, but it is really important, not just for product managers, but especially in leadership roles like you're in, where there is we don't talk about it enough, but there's a huge emotional human side aspect to that as well, right? It can cause frustration. It some people talk to me about imposter syndrome. Like I've talked to chief product officers who tell me they suffer from imposter syndrome. And I'll share with you candidly, I have as well in the past. So that might be a session that's interesting to you as well in a couple of weeks. So
Yep, perfect. Thank you. I
yeah,
mean, I'm really looking for those alliance making, because like Mike said, at that level, it's not a question of competence. It's not a question of not seeing through the rationale there, but it's more of an alignment and everybody agreeing to it for
yeah,
the greater good. And it's not the short term thing. It's like, hey, what's greater
That's
good in
right.
2 years' time?
That's right.
yeah, yeah. And so to that point, that there's a strategic long-term aspect, but there's also just a pragmatic short-term
Hmm.
aspect that we have to just sometimes compromise on. At the risk, I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of a shameless plug in here. Is that this is actually one of the things that I talk a lot about in fact my weekly newsletter is a lot of these sort of tactics and strategies of how to rephrase things, reposition things, to try and get some of that stakeholder alignment. But it is difficult. It can be very difficult. Egos are involved. You know, I mean, look, no one gets to that level, whether it's in politics or in business or I've worked in nonprofits, and when you get to that level, trust me, it's like I don't know. I believe again, this is one of my another one of my hot takes. I think you have to have a little bit of an ego to get to that level. You have to be ambitious, and so you're dealing with. Fortunately, in my career, I've dealt with mostly really nice, smart people, but they've got egos too. Um, and there's a lot at stake. So yeah. Anyways, we've tortured that topic probably enough. All right, we are 20 minutes past. Any other last questions? Go ahead and raise your hand if you want. Happy to address them. Otherwise, I'll let everyone go, yeah? Going once, going twice. All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Mike. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone. Have a
Thank you. Great
talk
session.
to you later.
Great questions.
Thanks, guys.